Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Crimes and Times. Once again, for our returning viewers, you can see I'm still on the road by the very vanilla backdrop we have there, plain vanilla, and I'm not in my work attire. A little late getting started tonight because as I opened up my computer, it decided it was time for an update and a reboot, and that took about 15, 20 minutes. So sorry for the delay. Tonight, we're going to talk about sexual predators. We've been hearing a lot about that on the news lately, unfortunately. And I brought two guests tonight who are experts in the field. First, we have Linda Williams, who was the director of training at the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. And we also have Victoria Pickering, who is the head of education and research at the Metropolitan Organization to Counter Sexual Assault. That's a lot of firepower there, guys, and we need superheroes like you right now. Linda, give us a very brief understanding of what you did and what the organization's mission was or is when you were there.
Well, personally, my mission was to provide education and training to underserved police departments across the state of Texas. But I also trained at state and national conferences. I was a training consultant for the Department of Justice Office of Crimes Training and Technical Assistance Center. They sent me across the country again to train at underserved police departments around the nation, and used the skills that I learned on the job. I have a pretty extensive criminal justice background working with sex offenders, and use that knowledge along with education that I achieved along the way. I was fortunate enough to be trained by what I consider some of the top FBI profilers in the field, and I've been blessed in my profession that I've been trained by what I consider some of the best, and I really think what we do is really important, especially in these days. I see what's going on the news and the misconceptions of how people are explaining what's going on, or they don't simply understand the dynamics of what's going on, and as kind of I'm a consultant now, so I'm kind of a soldier on the sidelines. It kind of upsets me that I can't really get out there and do more. I feel like I'm not doing my job right now, but that's kind of basically what I've done. I was appointed by former Governor Rick Perry to his Criminal Justice Advisory Council, and we represented judges and district attorneys and law enforcement across the state, and we advised the governor on criminal justice legislation that he should support in the legislature.
I see, very good. Just so I mean, I've been on the sidelines after a 27-year career, for 10 years now, Lindell, but this is what we do. We do things like this to keep our finger in the game and keep doing what we believe in. Victoria, tell us about your organization, what they do, the mission there.
Yes, so the Metropolitan Organization to Counter Sexual Assault is the local sexual assault and abuse crisis center in the Kansas City metro area. So we work both in Kansas and Missouri, both sides of the state line. And our mission is to improve the lives of those who've been impacted by sexual assault and abuse, and to prevent sexual violence in our community. So we are really working directly with survivors, both children and adults, as well as their families and the community to address this issue, to raise awareness, and ideally create an environment where people are less likely to experience sexual violence.
Interesting. And how do the clients come to you? Are they referred by the court system or a social service agency? How do they find you?
Through a couple of different ways. One of the primary access points for clients to our services is through our hospital advocacy program. So we have 22 area emergency rooms in the Kansas City area that provide sexual assault forensic exams, so rape kit exams. And anytime someone goes to one of those hospitals and asks for a sexual assault exam or says that they've been sexually assaulted and need to be seen, we are automatically dispatched to the hospital 24/7. So we provide support and advocacy in the hospital setting. We also have a 24-hour hotline, so people can call us anytime, day or night, to access services. We respond to calls from law enforcement to provide support. And then my role is really to engage both youth in schools and the community at large to learn more about our services and learn more about sexual violence. So a lot of our clients come in through hearing about us in their school or in their faith community through a presentation or seeing a moxa table at a community fair, really just wherever we can access the community to let them know about how to reach out and get services.
Okay, very good. Now, Linda, you talked about something that struck my ear, the underserved police department, training them. And the reason that struck, I remember when I first became a cop, this was 1980. I worked for a very progressive, well-educated, speaking about institutionally, police department. And I remember responding to my first rape case. And I couldn't believe the stupid things I heard certain cops say, not in front of the victim, but, the guy talked later. And I'm like, really? Even though it was 1980, I said, I thought we kind of got beyond that. So I was very fortunate myself to have some training when I was going through John Jay, sexual crimes investigation, by one of the original founders, sergeant of the NYPD, sex crimes unit. During the 70s, when late 60s, early 70s, the professionalization of police departments started, and they got away from the old boy attitude. So
Right.
Do you find now, besides the technical aspect of sex crimes and rape investigations, the forensics, are you finding that there's still departments that need training, sort of the things that Victoria would help with, how to sort of talk someone through it, how to respond in a way that's not going to further isolate or psychically wise damage the victim any further? Is that part of the training you find they need?
Well, what in Texas, the basic peace officer academy, the officers received approximately 2 weeks of training on sexual assault, and that includes everything: victim services, investigation, evidence collection, everything. And it was why our job was so important, because their lack of knowledge, and it's not their fault. You could only know what's been provided to you, and I was. I've actually been shocked at the lack of information they have, and also their lack of sensitivity in dealing with sexual assault survivors. One of the things that I tried to emphasize to police officers, this may be your 50th sexual assault investigation that you've had, and this is old school for you, but this is the first time this person has gone through this, and they are suffering all sorts of trauma, and trying to explain to police officers why an hour after a sexual assault, how that they may not be able to piece everything together, and why maybe a week later they come into their office, go, I don't know why I told you he had a red shirt on. He had a green shirt on. I don't know. And that doesn't mean they were lying. It just means that all of a sudden the chemicals in their brain are starting to settle down, and they're starting to put the pieces back together. And for them to understand that and not think that the victim is lying to them. And that was, and at the time that I retired, and with the trainings that I still do, pretty much an uphill battle to make police officers understand the dynamics of trauma and what causes victims to not be able to remember details of their sexual assault, even though it just happened an hour ago.
Right. And that's a great point, Lyndall, because you and I know, law enforcement, once someone says something, once they change their mind, like, they can't remember anything, they're lying, they're changing the story, there goes their credibility. Victoria, in where you are, like in the greater Kansas City area, I know we've got some big city, great police departments. But do you find with some of the smaller towns and cities, some of the stuff Linda was just saying, there needs to be more training and understanding as to how to treat the victim of sexual assault rather than just the forensics and the report writing?
Oh,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
And I
You know,
apologize. I'm dealing with a little tickle in my throat right now, so I'm gonna try not to cough in the camera.
Okay.
So we work with about 40 police jurisdictions in the greater Kansas City area, and we do training in a number of ways. The first way that we do training is through our police academy training. So our young new recruits who are very energetic and they're very enthusiastic and they really want to do the best possible job they can do. And our training with them is usually incredibly effective. We're talking about the impact trauma can have on a victim, and I think they really, excuse me, I think they really understand those concepts. But like Lindell said, when you get into the field and you're on your 10th or 20th or 50th sexual assault response, it's really easy to forget how your words and how your behavior can impact a survivor. So we still see a great need for training in all law enforcement jurisdictions, not just in our smaller, more rural departments, but really across the board. We're lucky in that we have some larger police departments like Kansas City Police Department in Missouri or KCK PD in Kansas who have dedicated investigators whose job is to work in sex crimes. They know exactly how to talk to a survivor.
Right. You know, one of the things I'm sorry, Victoria, go ahead. You got a little bit of a delay. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So what I was going to say is one of the things that is a challenge is not the investigators who are going to spend weeks, if not months, working with a survivor on a case. It's the initial response. So the patrol officers who are coming out to the hospital, who are doing that initial response, taking the initial report, they really set the tone for that survivor and how they're going to engage with law enforcement, how comfortable they are, whether they feel supported, and whether they feel believed.
Well, and that was the question, do you find sometimes, like as Lyndall said, if they change their mind or they say something inconsistent, do you find right away the officers tend to give them the feeling they're not being believed?
I think it really depends on the training that the officer has received. If we are doing a good job of teaching officers about the neurobiology of trauma, about the impact that the trauma can have on somebody's brain chemistry, on their memory, on their ability to recount things in a chronological manner, then we will have officers, and I've seen this multiple times, who are very patient, and even if they hear somebody struggle with their statement or struggle with the chronology, they're validating that person and allowing them the time and space they need to put things together. And other times you can see it in someone's face when they're taking a report and all of a sudden their face changes and there's a real palpable tension and disbelief in the room. And that's incredibly devastating for a survivor who has shown the courage and vulnerability to talk with a stranger in what's probably the most traumatizing moments of their life, or shortly thereafter, to feel that disbelief come into the room.
I'm sure. No, Lyndall, I'm sure you trained officers, in the response. And I know when I was a cop, they always taught us, you get to the scene of a car accident or shooting, where there's deaths. To us, it's just another call. And, when the cameras are rolling, the news is there. And you can even see it now at the scene of something. You'll see two cops off to the side talking and laughing. And it comes off as very cold. And the public might feel, well, why they're laughing at this. And they're not laughing at that. They're just, it's just them talking to each other, releasing tension, because this is just another job for them. But do you have to constantly remind these officers, like you said, you have to show empathy, you have to listen, and, you have to not show any signs of disbelief at the time. Is that a challenge for you? And second part of the question, Lyndall, with the increase in female officers these days, do you think that has helped our awareness in treating victims of sexual crime?
Well, one of the issues that we had in Texas was just the size of Texas. And in Texas, you have 4 separate, I'll just use the word countries in Texas. You've got like Central Texas, Austin area, very metropolitan, very well educated. You have East Texas, kind of rural. You have the Panhandle, which is your cowboys, and then you have the Valley, which is primarily Latino. And so every department and every region of Texas is a little bit different. We have great metropolitan police departments like in Houston and Dallas and Fort Worth and Austin. But then, there's one particular county in South Texas. It's a tremendously large county. It's as large as some of the northeastern states. And they have a sheriff and like 6 deputies. And a deputy may drive 3 hours to get to a call. And that deputy, who's had 2 hours of training, is your investigator, is your evidence collector,
Really?
and
Yeah.
is your person that's going to take that statement. And the quality of services across the state of Texas leaves a lot to be desired. It's nobody's fault. It's just the enormity of the situation. And one of the reasons that we were funded to serve underserved police departments is because those counties don't get training. Those officers got the training at Initial Police Academy, and if we don't go out there, pretty much they don't get any additional training. And we represented all the rape crisis centers across the state of Texas. But even at that, they can't reach out to every little county to provide, the kind of training she was talking about working with the officers and talking about trauma and things like that. And it really makes it difficult. And we find that the victims across the state of Texas have many different experiences simply based on where they're located in the state. I know I sound critical, but I'm not trying to be critical. It's just the facts of life in a very large and in a lot of times very rural parts of a state. And I think I'm proud of the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. They do a wonderful job in reaching out and providing services across the state. But we just don't have the funding to do all the things that we want to do. And I stayed on the road pretty much all the time trying to train and trying to provide this information to officers. And it was a fine line for me providing information to help them do their job.
Absolutely. And Wendell, Lindell, I'm sorry, you're making a very good point there as well. We have to understand, you're not criticizing anybody, you're just talking about the reality. And I think now as we have an increasing understanding of the trauma of the pains of a victim of sexual assault, to understand how important that police response is. And when there's something lacking there, it hurts. Victoria, when I was a young officer, I remember that first serial rape case I got involved in investigating, and it left a profound effect on me. And as a matter of fact, I used that story in my first novel, Midnight Sin, and it opens up, with a woman getting raped. And one of the scenes I really put a lot of thought into is, where the boyfriend shows up at the hospital. And my question is, do you find sometimes these family members, especially husbands and boyfriends, can do more harm than good, just again from the machismo of it all?
So I think having a strong support system is one of the main contributing factors to somebody's healing process. And unfortunately, we are not trained on how to be victims of crime. We're not trained on how to be loved ones of victims of crime. Ideally, we shouldn't have to be. We shouldn't have to live in a society where that's part of what we expect to happen. And so I think oftentimes loved ones, family members, partners are really grasping for how to make sense of what has happened to the person they care about, how to support them, and also how to manage their own emotional response. And that's part of how I see our role in the hospital setting is we are there for the survivor, and we're also there to tell their loved ones, here are some good things you can say. I can sit with a partner and say, I know that this is horrifying for you to see the person you care most about in the world go through this. Here is a book that can help guide you on how to be the best support person. And it's also why we provide all of our services, including our free counseling services, not only to survivors, but also to their family members. So if a mother of a child who's been abused, or a spouse of somebody who's been assaulted, or even a best friend or a roommate wants to come in for counseling services to process their emotions and learn how to best support that individual, all of those services are completely accessible and free for them. Because they're going to be around, after the investigation, after any court proceedings. That's who that survivor is going to rely on, and we want to make sure that they're taking care of themselves in the process as well.
Right, and I think you answered my question diplomatically. But again, do you find sometimes the husband, the boyfriend, and I'm recognizing that sexual assault can be, a female perpetrator, male victim. I understand that, but I think the overwhelming number of the sexual assaults, the male perpetrator on a female victim. So again, do you find sometimes that the husband, the boyfriend, really need extra counseling because it becomes somewhat about them more so than the victim?
I would say I can see that happening. That hasn't been my experience where it has done more harm than good. Okay. I think with the proper support, they may make mistakes in their initial response, but I think having someone there by your side is better than not. So, definitely we can all make mistakes in how we respond to somebody's experience with violence. We're all capable of centering ourselves versus the person we should be centering. But my experience in the field has not been that support people generally do more harm than good.
That's good news. I like to hear it. That's good. Go ahead, Lyndall.
I have a question for Victoria. Do you find that the way police work with your victims, a lot of it is based on their perception of the victim?
I think that's absolutely possible. When law enforcement are doing their jobs, they are oftentimes seeing dozens of people who've experienced crime every day. And so it is easy to make a quick judgment. And I think one of the things that I tell law enforcement when I do trainings with them is that every single experience, every single survivor is unique in the way they respond to trauma and the way they respond to violence. And so that has to be treated as an individual experience, as an individual interaction, and not make any assumptions or judgments based on spending 5 minutes with a person. And when law enforcement approach working with a survivor in that very individualized, trauma-informed way, then we see some of that judgment go away. But it's definitely.
Let me get in there. I want to, with the time for move some. I want to get now to some of the typologies of sex offenders, and then I want to get more to how officers are trained, but more to the victimology. So, Linda, let's start with the most violent, the feared, stranger rapist, take someone by force. What type of personality profile could you tell us about that? And we all understand there's no one profile that fits everybody, certainly not every sexual predator. I want to compare and contrast the different types of sexual predators from that all the way down to what we're hearing in the news now, those who actually just abuse their power, in sexual harassment ways. So, Linda, what if you were training us sort of on psychology, of the rapist, the one that just attacks with a lot of physical harm, the danger of the, what am I trying to say? The stranger rapist. What would you say about that?
Well, Michael, I want to say one thing first, that stranger sexual assault is extreme minority in the number of sexual assaults that actually take place. They tend to get the headlines because they tend to be serial in nature. They tend to be violent in nature. But the reality is they are by far the minority in sexual assaults. The reality is what we refer to as non-stranger sexual assaults make up the majority of sexual assaults. It's someone that the person actually knows. And in a lot of ways, for victims, that and I'm not talking about physical damage to the victim. I'm now talking about psychological damage to the victim. In a lot of ways, they can rationalize being raped by a stranger, but they can't rationalize being raped by a family member or a husband or a boyfriend. That's very hard. They start questioning who they can trust and what are they going to, how am I going to live my life now with the inability to trust if it's a woman, males in my life. And to my way of thinking, there's a gentleman by the name of Dr. David Lesak who did a study called The Undetected Rapist. And by far, some of the best work in my mind, my professional opinion, that's ever been done in this, and it's been replicated. And in his studies, and he did a lot of these on college campuses. And this is not a statement that a lot of higher education institutions is going to be happy to hear, but I can tell you right now for almost a dead certain fact that there are serial rapists on every single college campus in the United States, and they're just not being caught. And 85% of women who are sexually assaulted on college campuses don't report it. And we're seeing now, the Me Too movement. Well, all of a sudden, women are going, no, I'm not going to be quiet. This football player raped me, and I'm not going to be quiet about it because y'all don't want me to talk about it. And I'm using football players, and it's fraternities, it's any organization on campus. And it's very disturbing to me the number of sexual assaults that's happening in that world, and it seems to be a secret held by only the Victorias and the people like myself in the world who understand the dynamics of this, that is just not getting the attention that it's getting. And if you think about what's going on now with all the sexual harassment claims, if women don't report sexual assaults, why in the world do we expect them to report sexual harassment? I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
All right, that's a great point. And Victoria, I see you shaking your head a lot with Lindell's statements there. Usually I try to go at it with different points of views, but not in this case. You guys, it's just similar to what you do and your education. Yeah. Victoria, is that what a lot of your victims, victims of non-stranger rape and assault going through that crisis? And are they, again, does that make it worse in the sense of people believing them or underestimating the amount of damage? Like, oh, it was your boyfriend. What's the big deal? You probably had sex before. Does that also become an issue?
Absolutely. So the vast majority of survivors that I've worked with and the research showed, backs this up, the vast majority are individuals who were assaulted by someone they trusted, someone they knew personally, whether it was a coworker or an intimate partner or a family member. And we talk about sexual assault as a society in an absolutely incorrect way. We have a very clear stereotype of stranger in the bushes. And we can talk to young people and we can talk to one another about how to stay away from those bushes. But if the assailant is not in those bushes, they're in our homes, they're in our dorms, they are in our workplaces, then the approach we take to prevention is completely ineffective. And then also the way we respond to survivor stories will also be ineffective because the reality of their stories do not line up with what we're expecting. as a culture. So there is a deterrent in our popular narrative for survivors to reporting. If everyone has always talked to me about, stay away from those bushes, and I'm assaulted by someone that I care about and was supposed to, I was supposed to be able to trust, then there's automatically a question of whether or not I will be believed and whether or not my experience was even valid or even a sexual assault. And so I think breaking through that narrative is critical if we're going to empower people to access justice in whatever way that looks for them.
So do you think then, Victoria, Victoria, do you think then it is the fear of not being believed that is one of the primary drivers for women not reporting sexual assault?
Yes.
Lyndall, I think
most studies have shown that's the number one reason why individuals are nervous about or choose not to report is fear of not being believed, and fear of being re-traumatized by the process. And those are both incredibly legitimate fears. When I talk to middle schoolers, I always say when we talk about, fear of not being believed, I say, raise your hand if you've heard on TV in the last 12 months, somebody question the validity of a victim, and every single kid raises their hand.
Interesting. I just got to stop and tell my engineer, the reason I'm looking down, I'm having incredibly bad luck tonight. First the computer rebooted, now my phone is going out, and this is how he sends me the questions that the audience has. We have a lot. So if you see me messing around, I'm trying to get the system back up here so I can get the questions. There were a lot of questions there. Lyndall, you wanted to jump in on that. I saw that.
Yeah, and one of the Victoria and I come from different areas. She's working with direct services, and I never did work with direct services. Mine was with law enforcement and education of law enforcement, and then the general knowledge for the public. And I will admit this. I've had a lot of criticism over the years on district attorneys for what I believe is their unwillingness to prosecute these kinds of cases. But when you look at research that shows that it is almost impossible to get a conviction where there's been prior consensual sex in a relationship, why would a district attorney take that case? And one of the things that we believed in was trying to educate the public, because you know who they're going to be? They're going to be our jurors. And we have to educate the public because they're the jurors who's going to hear these cases. And I wrote this down. 6 out of 10 Americans that a woman is more likely to be raped by a stranger. So if they're going straight into this, and if her boyfriend raped her, they've already got this pre-existing idea that it's only strangers who rape. Well, then, where do you go from there? And I understand for district attorneys that it's a high road. But you know what? My opinion is we got to try. We try some of these and we bring it to the public attention. And we make some of this information, the public aware of it, kind of like some of the stuff that's been going on, in the news right now. All of this was kind of under the covers. Well, all of a sudden now we're talking about stuff we didn't talk about even 6 months ago. And and it's like, and I don't want to make this political, but the bravery of those women in Alabama to come forward in that particular state and point a finger is just the bravery of those women is just remarkable in my mind. And this has nothing to do with the political nature of it. It's just the bravery of those women to come forward in that environment.
Now, let me ask you this, and I want to throw this out to both of you. When we talk about, let's say, the campus rapes, and we talk about, we usually, our mind right away would go to frat, it would go to a football team. Is there a certain, again, personality that we find that attracts people to these group activities that would give them sort of this predisposition or this belief that what they're doing is okay? Do we see, again, that similarity in personalities where they're drawn to these sort of machismo type of activities? Either one of you, your thoughts?
You want to address it, Victor? I'll take it.
You know, I'm gonna hand this one over to you. I do not ever posit myself as an expert on offender psychology. I agree with Lyndall that Dr. David Lezak is really our leading expert, and also Joan Tabachnik is another expert in that field. But Lyndall, if you've got some more information on profiles, that would be great.
Well, before we got on the air today, I wrote this down, and this was the research that Dr. Lezak did, and it's going to take just a second, but I think it's really important for you to understand. He did research, this research project at Duke University and the University of Massachusetts at Boston. And the only reason I bring that up is because of the different dynamics of those two schools. It's very different. And in a survey he gave to male students that he disguised as a sex survey, this was one of the questions on the survey. Have you ever had sexual intercourse with an adult when they didn't want to because you used physical force? And I think everybody pretty much understands the question you asked. In his survey, 1,882 men answered yes to that question. This was anonymous. And of those 1,882, he identified 120 rapists. Now, he interviewed those guys, and this is all voluntary information. This is not, assuming anything. They admitted to 483 rapes or attempted rapes, 49 other types of sexual assault, forced oral sodomy or anal sodomy, 319 acts of sexual assault against children, 95 acts of physical abuse against children, 275 acts of battery against adults, for a total of 1,221 offenses. And of those, one was reported. And the average was 4 rapes per person. And this was all on college campuses. And so it becomes like in fraternities, kind of a groupthink kind of deal. And he has one example where the whole fraternity would set their house up as essentially a rape factory. They had rooms provided for women to bring women to when they got too drunk that they couldn't defend themselves. And so they're different in stranger rapists, in that stranger rapists tend to have been born with a deficit in the way that they have control features and their anger towards women. These guys, they just simply, I don't know, the way I would say, they just don't have morals, and it's just they don't care. And so far in our society, they've been able to get away with it.
Yes,
so what's there to fear?
Yeah, and I think just to add on to this, one of the ways that I talk to young people about this is that the vast majority of individuals and the vast majority of men are not perpetrators of sexual violence.
Right.
So we have a small portion of the population doing a lot of damage. And what we can take from that is that they're doing it to more than one person. One of the issues is that majority who is not committing sexual violence can stand either on the sidelines or can stand in between. And so we have to create a culture in which we recognize that the excuses we hear, things where people say, oh, well, I didn't realize I didn't have consent, or I didn't know that they had that much to drink, those excuses that are used by these serial perpetrators, if the rest of the population says, you know what, I'm not buying that, that's not a valid excuse, that's not okay, I don't accept it, and I'm not going to condone that. If we stand in between, then we isolate that part of the population that's committing these acts of violent crimes. And I think that's part of the cultural change that needs to happen, so that we aren't in an environment where there's no risk in committing these types of acts.
And,
right.
and one of the things that we tried to press forward was that it's time for men to stand up and start saying that's not right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And when I was on this radio show, we were talking about bullying, and one of the questions they asked me, I'm saying, where are the kids who just know to stop the bullying? Who know how to get in there and not maybe put their lives at risk, but know at least report something. And I think about the same thing in frats or anywhere else, where are the young men, though we've seen it on one occasion at least, that we know about, where are those young men who are at least going to stop someone from dragging a girl who's passed out up to a room, knowing exactly what's going to happen? Where are all those young men? Why aren't they standing up? Go ahead, Lindell, you're shaking your head. Are you wondering too, or do you have an answer?
Well, honestly, Michael, if I had that answer, I'd be writing books like you. Because boy, I would be a.
Thanks for the plug, by the way. I'm not good at my self promotion, so thank you.
But I don't know. I don't know. We worked tirelessly we had a prevention team that worked tirelessly working on college campuses to start engaging men to stand up for women on campuses, and if they see behavior like this going up, stand up and say, no, this is not going to happen. But it's going to be a mind shift, and this is not going to be something that's going to happen overnight. Unfortunately, it's going to take a generation. And I think working in schools and with the bullying and the gender respect and racial respect, all of that has to start at an early age, so they come all the way up through their education, understanding that it's not okay to be bullied. It's not okay to endanger women. It's not okay to be prejudiced. And until that happens, it looks bleak to me until we can get into the schools and bring them up through the ranks and have them understand that and be willing to stand up.
And we're doing that work. That's one of the things. Oh, sorry. I think there's a delay. I'm talking over you, Michael.
Go ahead. You're the guest.
I was going to say, I think the answer to your question of where are these other people, where are the people who can step up and intervene and say, this is not okay. You can't take that person into that bedroom. I'm not going to watch while you harm another individual. The answer is those people are in middle school right now. They're in elementary school. They're in high school. They are learning the tools. And I think one of the great failings of, I'll take ownership of this, in my generation, is that we have not taken responsibility to give younger people the skills and the tools they need to intervene successfully and safely. And so we're trying to do that now with younger generations and saying, we may not be able to make a huge dent in what's happening on campuses tomorrow, but we can make a huge dent in what's going to happen on campuses in 5 years and in 10 years, because these young people do care deeply about protecting one another. And it's our job to give them the skills and the tools they need to do that.
I was right. And I was going to dedicate an episode just to sexual assault on campus. Because a while back, I was watching all the problems schools were having with the Title IX investigations, and either they don't do them, or they don't do them correctly, or they, prosecute the accused without due process. And my company, Spirit Asset Protection, we started an initiative where we're trying to take some of the skill sets from what we did in the FBI and apply them to universities and colleges, help them see and assess whether or not they're responding properly. And if they knew how to bring these cases to adjudication, I can tell you that as a business perspective, that we had absolutely zero success. Not one university that we reached out to had any interest, or at least willing to have us come in there and take a look at what they were doing. So it's interesting that we got on that topic, because I thought that was a separate subject on its own, but I guess it all relates. Let's go a little more looking at the topology of these offenders. Lyndall, let's think of someone who watches porn, someone who's an exhibitionist, someone who is a sexual harasser. Are these people, that they share, again, some common personality trait, and are these people that may then go on to rape or more physical aspects of sexual assault? Or do they tend to stay in sort of their own, little corner of their deviance?
Well, one of the things when I did my sexual predator trainings that I really tried to emphasize to police officers, and when I talked about sexual paraphilias and voyeurism being one of them, and we sort of think in this country that voyeurism is sort of an innocuous crime, sort of no harm, no foul sort of situation. Well, if the woman was peeped at, well, yes, she was violated, but in the total scope of the world, is it really that big a deal? Yes, it is. It's really that big a deal. And research has shown that the vast majority of serial rapists, that's where they began, with peeping. Now, the question came up, well, every kid we find peeping, are we supposed to get them involved in the criminal justice system? And the answer is absolutely not. But we need to find out what the motivation was. The motivation may be as old as the hills. An adolescent male with his hormones raging, and he wants to see, a naked woman. Well, if that's the case, all right, that's wrong, but that's something we can deal with. But if there are deeper issues than that, or if we catch the young man, he's peeping and simultaneously masturbating while he's doing this, this is different. And one of the things that a lot of people don't really understand is that sexual predators, their behavior can start being seen as early as 6, 7, 8 years of age with some of their behaviors. There was a adolescent treatment facility in Texas for sex offenders. And the clinical director and I were friends. And I asked him one day, in your estimation, what is your youngest sexual predator in your facility? And he said 8 years old. Now, let me say this. I'm not a big proponent of if you were molested as a child, you're going to grow up to be a molester. I'm not a proponent of that. But there's a lot of professionals who say that, if you have a propensity or even the brain chemistry that we're finding in psychopaths to do this, I know Dr. Robert Hare said that if you have that propensity and the child is sexually, physically, or emotionally abused, it's a recipe for creating a monster. And so I think we need to start looking at some of these crimes like voyeurism and taking it more seriously. It's not something...
Lyndall, I got to interrupt you on that one, and you're going to know why. All right? You're going to know why I'm interrupting you. Hey, Max, that's engineer. Max, show that slide of the game that I sent you earlier. It came out of something you sent me, Lyndall. I got to get your response, and I have to get Victoria's response. That's not it. The other slide, Max, of the game. Of the guy and the girl, Max. Wrong slide. Hold on, here, the wrong. That was a quote that came out today, which another environmental factor.
Well, let me say this based on that slide.
Hold on one second. Max, the game slide. The man, the woman.
If you're going to tell me that a woman who dresses inappropriately is inviting herself to be sexually assaulted, then what you're telling me is somebody who drives a Mercedes-Benz is inviting themselves to be carjacked. And what you're telling me is that somebody who wears a Rolex watch is inviting themselves to be robbed because they're wearing a Rolex watch or driving a Mercedes. That's absolutely ludicrous and stupid.
Right. And that was that comment I wanted to get to. But what I wanted to specifically show was that slide you sent me. I don't know if the engineer can't come up with it. Victoria, it was a game. Max, I'm sorry, Linda, what was that game from? What was that game? Of the Peeping Tom game? The slide you sent me? Lyndall, remember that?
Oh, you mean from the Nickelodeon?
The Nickelodeon, right. It's a game where it shows a man peeping in at a woman in a shower.
It's called, the name of the game, it was in Nickelodeon games, it was called their addictive games, and it was called Perry the Peeper. And
oh my goodness.
They've sanitized the internet now. I mean, after you and I talked, I hunted for it, and I couldn't find it. And I've actually played it online, and it's not only peeping, the whole premise of that game was that this guy saw this woman, this young lady on campus, and he stalked her back to her house, then peeped into her window, and you never saw any body parts, but when she would turn her back and take her shirt off, you could hit your mouse, his eyes would bug out, and you would get points for that.
Okay,
Oh
so
my
Victoria,
goodness.
I know you're not into the profiling, whatever. As a woman, as someone who deals with these victims, what do you say to something like that from an environmental factor?
First of all, I'm just so sad that that even exists, but I'm also not surprised. I think that this goes right to the core of what we were talking about earlier with the idea that there are cultural factors in addressing sexual violence, and one of them is a sense of ownership of people's bodies. When we live in a culture where there's an idea that somebody's body, whether it's a woman or anyone else, is somehow that someone else is entitled to that, whether it's looking or physical contact or making comments about that person's body, we are opening the door for more and more violent crimes. And so we really need to be looking and questioning why do we think it's normal to behave in a way that expresses ownership or entitlement to someone else's body, as opposed to a culture where we all have bodily autonomy, we all deserve to have our consent respected, and really focusing on that difference in mentality.
Okay, there's the screen there. Can you see that?
Yeah.
You guys see that? All right. I mean,
Yes.
he sent me that, and I didn't know if this was a joke or not. So, was there really a game that does that? I'm actually taking it off now, please. It's offensive to the senses. You see that, it's just like you. Are you shocked? Is that really? And I called Lindley. Goes, yeah, that really was a game that was on the internet, and I couldn't believe it. Again, for the message that it sends, and the environment, the environmental factors of what we're telling young men is okay versus what is completely not okay. Let me go to. We have not that much time. I want to go to a few questions
This, Michael.
here. I did get my phone up. Go ahead,
Michael,
Lyndall. Yeah.
the reason I put that, I was talking about voyeurism, and I put that in to show the normalization of how we see peeping is. It's a game. It's not that big a deal. See, we can go online and we can play this. Now, let me make it. I want to say this. This was not intended for children, but it was a Nickelodeon game, and I think if you told any parent, listen, I'm gonna let your kid go online and they're gonna get on a Nickelodeon site and they're gonna play games. Is that okay with you? I don't think prior to that, I don't think there's a parent in the world who go, oh, sure, get on Nickelodeon. That's a nice. Well, not necessarily. Parents have to be responsible, but it's also an indicator of just how innocuous we feel like peeping is. And then my point was, no, we really need to take this particular crime serious in terms of future sexual predation.
Right. And when we talk about on the show, we've talked about mass killers. And we often talk about many of my friends, criminologists, profilers, psychologists who I consult with this, say, yes, it is the video games and the TV and the movies and the constant, barrage of this alternate reality, this virtual reality that creates a desensitization to human life that almost, gives them the feeling it's okay to commit these violent acts. So then you bring it down to something which people probably poo-pooed all these years anyway, which is voyeurism, and they don't get the understanding of just how serious it is, as Victoria says, to respect someone else's body. You don't have ownership of it, and it's not okay just because you did not touch, right?
Absolutely, and it's just like with pornography. I see a strong parallel to peeping. It's like, I think there are some kids who stumble onto pornography. It's like I used to in my trainings when I had parents in the room, and I would tell them, if you think your kid has not seen pornography, you're out of your mind. Okay, I'm not saying your kid trolls pornography all day long, but if you're thinking that your kid hadn't seen it, you're nuts. And how many of you looked at, the history on your kid's phone? Because, that is a computer, and you see them like all of a sudden the light bulbs going off, go, oh my God, I never thought about looking at his or her phone, that there may be something on there. And it's the same thing with pornography. I have a slide that I use, and where this guy says, I watched this video, and then in his words, I just went for it and I went out and raped someone. And so, for a lot of guys, that this is the emphasis, that's the match. It's what lights the candle that starts them down that path to more and more serious stuff. And people ask me about pornography, and as far as the sexual predators, it's like they're going to find it. But one of the things that's concerning to me, and I don't know if you look through some of the slides, like when I was doing the sexual paraphilias, and some of the slides seem kind of silly. But I tried to make that point that not all paraphilias are horrible, and some, they're fun stuff, but some is sick. And if you look at that one, I think it was, I Googled sex plus chicken plus bestiality, and there was over 1,500,000 hits in 0.3 seconds of topics of talking about sex with chickens.
Okay.
And so
let me
let
me just go on. We got a few minutes left here. Question comes in, Victoria. I'd like to get your response to this. Has to do with family members. How many of your sexual assault members, percentage-wise, just generally, are victims of family sexual assault or incest?
It's a minority of individuals. So it's hard to give an exact amount. Most studies are showing that sexual assault survivors, it's usually about 10% family members, but that varies depending on what organization you're working with, and so I don't want to give an exact amount, but it's significant, but it's less than a lot of people think. Oftentimes people assume that sexual violence within families is either 50% or the majority of what we see, especially with children, and it's not anywhere near that large. Oftentimes, when we talk about sexual assault in terms of the relationship between the survivor and the assailant, what we see is there's a clear understanding of stranger assaults, and there's a clear understanding of familial or even intimate partner assaults. So we understand that happens. But often the piece that we don't talk about as much is actually the other relationships that exist. So coworkers, friends, classmates, ex-partners, things like that. That makes up a very significant portion of sexual assault survivors, is people who weren't assaulted by a stranger, but they weren't assaulted by someone that they necessarily live with or are in a relationship with.
Right, and I guess that from you saying there's a small portion of people are the stranger rape, small portion is the family incest. So in between, just the fact that it must be rape by someone with whom you are familiar and have some relationship, exactly, no matter how casual. All right, we are running out of time here. This was a fascinating show, and I have so many more questions I wanted to ask, so many more questions the audience want to ask. But within the hour, we can't do it. Victoria, any closing remarks?
No, thank you for taking the time and addressing this issue. I think it's absolutely necessary that we raise awareness within our communities about this, and we recognize that none of us is going to fix this. None of us can do everything about this, but everyone can do something. Okay, and since I live in the Kansas City area, I'm near you, make this statement publicly. If you need my assistance some way, if there's something I could do to volunteer to help your organization achieve that, please call me, and I will do it. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. Lindo, any closing remarks?
Yeah, I just want to make one thing, and this is kind of a sore spot with me, and with what we've been seeing on television a lot lately. Dropping of the word pedophile really irritates me. Pedophilia is a diagnosis. I wish people would start using the word child molester. Child molester covers the same thing, but it's not a diagnosis. All these new talking heads who use the word pedophile, none of them are psychologists. None of them know have tested these individuals. All pedophiles are child molesters, but not all child molesters are pedophiles. So if you just use the word child molester, you're catching them all, but you're not going into that diagnosis area. And that's all I gotta say about that. I just wish people would use the word child molester and not pedophile.
Right, and you're just making the point that there's so much more to talk about. We may have to have part 2 of this thing, because I could easily go on another hour with all the questions I have in my head and all the questions from the audience. Thank you both very much. You were tremendous guests, and you educated the audience a lot. Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate it. To all our audience out there, we want to thank you once again. This will be our last show for 2017. We're going to take a break for the holidays, and we'll come back 2018. So a couple things. Again, please go on to YouTube, Crimes and Times. Hit that little bell icon and become a subscriber. We did get a few after my appeal, but we need quite a bit more to hit that 100 mark and increase the number of platforms we have. On behalf of Max and his technical staff, for those celebrating tonight, a very happy third night of Hanukkah, and a very Merry Christmas when that comes around later, and a very Happy New Year when that comes around at the end of the year, of course. And starting in January, we're going to start out with a blockbuster rollout for Crimes and Times. We will speak with the FBI agent who was in charge of taking down John Gotti, and we will speak to an undercover ATF agent who infiltrated the Hells Angels. We'll be starting out with a really exciting year. Once again, I want to thank everybody. We had a great audience tonight. We've only been on the show. We started, I think, about 4 months ago, and the audience has grown beyond our expectations. And we really thank everyone for your support. Everyone have a great holiday season, and we'll see you back in January. I'm Michael Tabman. This is Crimes and Times. Good night.